Good afternoon and welcome to Lunch Break Live with Tea Party Patriots Action. I'm Bill Pasco, Tea Party Patriots man in Washington, and I'm delivering both the call to action and the Washington report this week. It's a very busy week in Washington. Let's get right to it. The Senate is about to go in recess this week as soon as they get done with what they're working on the floor. We'll get to that in a minute. The House is scheduled to return tomorrow and probably stay in session just one day, Wednesday, for a special session to consider the Senate version of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Last week in the House came back on Monday and voted to pass 3 bills under suspension of the rules. On Tuesday, the House took up H.Res. 537. That was a resolution to impeach President Trump for usurping Congress's powers, specifically Congress's power to declare war. The resolution was sponsored by Texas Democrat Al Green, who regularly seeks to impeach President Trump. The House took it up only to vote on a motion to table the resolution, and that motion to table passed by a vote of 344 to 79. With 128 Democrats crossing party lines to vote with 216 Republicans in favor of killing the resolution. But keep in mind, 79 Democrats voted against tabling it, indicating that on some level, at least, they wanted to impeach President Trump. Then the House took up and passed a rule governing floor consideration of 3 bills and 1 resolution. On Wednesday, the House took up and passed H.Res. 519, condemning the attacks on Minnesota lawmakers in Brooklyn Park and Champlin, Minnesota, and calling for unity and rejection of political violence in Minnesota and across the United States. They did that under suspension of the rules. Then the House took up H.R. 3944. That was the Military Construction, Veterans Affairs, and Related Agencies Appropriations Act of 2025, the first of the 12 appropriations bills. After agreeing to an amendment, the House passed the bill by a vote of 218 to 206, with all of 2 Democrats crossing party lines to vote with 216 Republicans in favor of the bill. On Thursday, the House took up and passed 2 bills. H.R. 875, the Jeremy and Angie Cie and Sergeant Brandon Mendoza Protect Our Communities from DUIs Act. That passed by a vote of 246 to 160. And then H.R. 275, the Special Interest Alien Reporting Act. That passed by a vote of 232 to 182. On Friday, the House took up and passed H.Res. 516, condemning the violent June 2025 riots in Los Angeles. The resolution passed by a vote of 215 to 195, with 7 Democrats crossing party lines to vote with the Republicans. And then they were done. This week in the House is expected back in session on Wednesday to vote on the Senate version of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. The leadership's hope is that they can pass the bill as it came out of the Senate and send it to the president for his signature by the 4th of July. Last week in the Senate came back on Monday and voted to end debate on the nomination of Daniel Zimmerman to be an Assistant Secretary of Defense. On Tuesday, the Senate voted to confirm him to that position. Then the Senate voted to end debate on the nomination of Paul Dabar to serve as Deputy Secretary of Commerce. On Wednesday, the Senate voted to confirm him to that position. Then the Senate voted to end debate on the nomination of Kenneth Keyes to serve as an Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. On Thursday, the Senate voted to confirm him to that position. On Friday, the Senate voted to reject a motion to discharge S.J. Res. 59 from the Committee on Foreign Relations. That was a joint resolution to direct the removal of United States armed forces from hostilities against the Islamic Republic of Iran that have not been authorized by Congress. The underlying measure was sponsored by Virginia Democrat Tim Kaine. The motion to discharge was rejected by a vote of 47 to 53. On Saturday evening, the Senate took up a motion to proceed to H.R. 1, the reconciliation bill. Early on, 50 votes were cast against the measure, including the votes of Republicans Rand Paul, Thom Tillis, and Ron Johnson. All the Democrats voted against the motion to proceed, so there were a total of 50 votes on the board against the bill. That meant that Majority Leader John Thune would have to win the votes of the remaining 50 Republicans. In very short order, 45 of them had cast their votes in favor, but there were still 5 votes outstanding, including the votes of Utah's Mike Lee, Wyoming's Cynthia Lummis, Alaska's Lisa Murkowski, and Florida's Rick Scott. In the end, Ron Johnson switched his vote from no to yes, and all but Rand Paul and Thom Tillis voted for it. So the motion to proceed was agreed to by a vote of 51 to 49. At that point, we knew the next steps would include up to 20 hours of debate, followed by a vote-a-rama, in which any senator can offer an amendment as long as it is germane. The record from 2008 was set at 44 amendments. The record from 2008 was set at 44. The 20 hours of debate is evenly divided between supporters of the bill, that is the majority party, and opponents of the bill, the minority party. Typically, the majority just wants to vote, so they don't use much of the 10 hours of debate that's afforded to them. The minority, on the other hand, wants to do everything it can to drag out the debate time because this is their one chance to draw attention to all the things they think are terrible about the bill. Consequently, the minority can also use a procedural hitch to draw things out. They can deny the majority's request for unanimous consent to dispense with the reading of the bill, and instead insist that the clerk of the Senate read the entire bill out loud. In this case, we're talking about a 940-page bill. Staff estimated it would take about 15 hours to read it all out loud before the 20 hours of debate would begin. So, this week in the Senate is in session right now, after having spent the weekend in session considering the reconciliation bill. As I speak, the Senate is engaged in its vote-a-rama, a time when all debate on the measure has been completed, and senators are now plowing through amendments, most of which, following tradition, are being offered by the minority party for the express purpose of jamming the majority party. The Senate should be finished with its business sometime later today. Now let's talk about a Supreme Court ruling last week. On Friday, in a case questioning the president's authority to eliminate birthright citizenship by executive order, the Supreme Court ruled that federal district court judges had overreached by ordering nationwide injunctions against the president's policies. In a 6-3 ruling with an opinion authored by Justice Amy Coney Barrett, the majority struck down the nationwide injunctions ordered by several justices, saying that going back to English common law, judges did not have this authority. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, writing in dissent, screamed bloody murder. Justice Barrett's majority opinion noted Justice Jackson's dissent dismissively and harshly, saying it ignored both precedent and the Constitution itself. Now to NATO spending. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization held its annual meeting last week, and President Trump notched another win on an issue that he's been talking about since before he became president. To wit, European nations have been riding on the backs of American taxpayers since World War II, and it's time for them to pony up and at least match the United States in defense spending as a percentage of their gross domestic product. When President Trump was first president 8 years ago, he pushed to have every member of NATO spend at least 2% of their GDP on defense. That was before Russia's big invasion of Ukraine and Russia's decision to launch the largest ground war in Europe since World War II. Now, most Western defense experts think a 5% floor would make more sense. And in the meeting that just took place, NATO members agreed to push their spending to that level. Just for the record, Poland and Estonia, one a nation that was once considered a captive nation, a part of the Soviet Union itself, and the other a country that's been regularly invaded from both sides, that is, both directions, have already been spending more than 2% of their GDP on defense. Estonia spent 3.43% of its GDP on defense in 2024, and Poland spent a whopping 4.12% of its GDP on defense in 2024. Now, let's go back to the reconciliation bill. We've been tracking several individual items in the reconciliation bill. One of those items is the insistence by blue state Republicans in the House, that is, those from New York, New Jersey, and California, 7 of them, that the deduction for state and local taxes, called the SALT deduction, is raised from its current cap at $10,000. The House bill raised that cap to $40,000 for individuals making $500,000 per year or less. But the Senate doesn't have any Republicans from New York or New Jersey or California. So there are no Republicans in the Senate whose constituents are screaming about this problem. After several days of negotiations, the Senate Republicans agreed to raise the cap from $10,000 to $40,000, but limit it to 5 years. So in the 6th year, that cap drops all the way back down to $10,000. That was good enough for most of the House SALT caucus. One House member, Nick LaLota of New York, said the deal wasn't good enough for him, so he might still vote no. We were also watching what happened with Medicaid savings. In the end, Senate Republicans increased the amount of savings from the Medicaid program. Now, in exchange for their votes on the motion to proceed, Senators Rick Scott, Mike Lee, and Cynthia Lummis won a promise from the leadership to allow them a vote on an amendment to be offered by Senator Scott that would eliminate the current incentive in the Medicaid federal-state match formula for states to expand Medicaid beyond its original target population. It's unlikely this amendment will pass, but it will set a marker, so we'll know which senators need to be educated on this crucial issue going forward. And we were watching the $1,000 per child entitlement giveaway called Trump accounts. They stayed in the bill. Let's talk for just a moment about what might happen in the House. What might happen in the House is it might not pass as is. The House Freedom Caucus is unhappy. Congressman Chip Roy of Texas has been railing about the weaknesses of the bill for some time, and he was quite active over the weekend. He's still not happy with it. But will his unhappiness be so great that it will cause him to vote against the bill? That's unknown. Andy Harris and Eric Burleson are other conservatives who have made their unhappiness known. Marjorie Taylor Greene is not happy either. Then you've got the moderates who are unhappy for other reasons. Jeff Van Drew and David Valadao are making noises. Thomas Massie is a definite no. If everybody is in town and everybody votes, Speaker Johnson can only afford to lose 3 votes. Any way you look at it, this is going to be a close vote. Now to the Jenny Beth Show. Episode 127 of The Jenny Beth Show dropped last Friday, featuring Jenny Beth's conversation with Kelly Shackelford of the First Liberty Institute. The two have a very interesting discussion regarding how religious freedom impacts free speech, parental rights, and more. One of the most interesting points of discussion is Kelly's explanation of First Liberty's defense of a 5-year-old girl's religious freedom. As always, it's highly recommended. And that's our Washington report for this week. Now to the call to action. We're still doing multiple calls to action. There's a lot still going on in Congress, and we need your help on multiple fronts. You'll be able to find the details on all this stuff on the front page of our website at teapartypatriots.org. That's teapartypatriots.org. There you'll find a slider that will take you to a page with all kinds of detail. And here's the general outline. We still need your help pushing the Senate to move forward and move faster on confirming Trump nominees. In particular, we want to see Casey Mulligan confirmed as the Chief Counsel for Advocacy at the Small Business Administration. We need your help in urging the Senate to pass the rescissions package when it comes back from its 4th of July recess. That's our broadcast for this week. Thanks for tuning in. Please take a moment to share this broadcast with your Facebook friends and post it to your other social media accounts. We'll see you next week, same time, same place. Until then, be well, be active, and enjoy your 4th of July weekend.